working? Yep. Great. Sorry about the delay. And it's great to have you all here at the 2023 Bruegel annual meeting. As you know, the theme of the meeting is a symphony in progress. So it's a remarkably upbeat theme, you might think. Behind this theme, I think there is a lot of work of trying to actually get that symphony sorted and sounding good. So the way I would think about the moment today, as opposed to where we stood a year ago, is we're no longer in crisis, with, of course, one big caveat, which is the situation in Ukraine, which continues to be terrible, and where our thoughts continue to be, as well as our support. Beyond that crisis, I think the big significance of this year is that we are starting to shift from a crisis management agenda to a more long-term agenda, and that is partly because of the timing, because of the European elections that are coming up, but also because the themes of the last year have left many big questions open. Arguably some really existential questions, all the way to asking whether the European model of openness, trade integration, rules should be continued in exactly that form, whether it needs adjusting, and whether that adjustment might actually threaten the core of the model. Now, I'm hugely pleased and happy to have Nadia Calviño with us. Nadia Calviño is, as you know, the first vice president of the Spanish government. She's also one of us, meaning she's been, you know, an economist. She is an economist. She's been an official of the European Commission, most recently as the Director General of the Budget. She has been the economy minister and first vice president of Spain from 2018 onward. And of course, Spain has the presidency of the European Union. There will be an informal meeting of the Economic and Financial Council of the European Union in only about 10 days in Santiago de Compostela, which is in the home region of Nadia, and a fantastic place. If you don't get a chance to go now, go some other time. And the priorities of the Spanish presidency are about some of those big topics. So without any further ado, I will ask Nadia to come up on the stage, give her introductory keynote, and then we will have a conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jeromin. It's a great pleasure to be here back with this very interesting community to share with you some thoughts on where we are and where we're heading. When I was listening to you, Jeromin, and I was looking at the title, talking about a symphony in progress, I was thinking, it is the New World Symphony that's in progress, and we need to make sure that it actually sounds as good as Forsak's symphony is sounding. But I think it's a very timely occasion for all of us to share some thoughts and have in-depth debates about some of the existential questions that Europe and the world is facing right now that you were referring to. And I'd start with this obvious assertion, which is that the world is undergoing massive changes. I usually use the image of the tectonic plaques of the global order that has served us well since the end of World War II are currently moving, and they're clashing, and they're also breaking apart in some other instances, with an impact that goes beyond security, which is the most obvious challenge. It has to do with trade, it has to do with technology, it has to do with energy security, and all the international relations and interlinkages and equilibria that we thought were fixed and thought would continue to rule the world in the years to come. And in this context, it is essential that Europe continues to play its role, continues to be a beacon of peace, prosperity, and also a vision which is based on collaboration, which is based on building alliances, both inside the EU and globally, if we want to succeed in this brave new world which is in the making. As you were saying, we have a very important meeting next week in Santiago de Compostela. It's the ECOFIN meeting, and it is a quite special ECOFIN because on top of bringing together the finance ministers of the European Union, we have invited finance ministers from the Latin American, Caribbean countries. And what are we going to be talking about? Well, exactly, building alliances, collaboration, the new global safety net, how to better work together and continue to foster the peace and prosperity that has been improving in the past decades. So in this context, let me just share with you, and I thought it would be interesting to share with you the top priorities of the Spanish presidency and the top issues that we will be discussing, and then I will be very happy to take your questions, Jeremy, and those from the audience here and back on the other side of the screens. Let me start by saying that Spain is facing and driving this presidency from a relatively comfortable position, which is a lot to say in the current circumstances. We have benefited from strong growth and job creation since 2021, after having one of the largest GDP drops as a result of the pandemic. We have pursued an economic policy that works based on fiscal responsibility, social justice and structural reforms, progressive structural reforms, forward-looking, modernizing structural reforms. We have been front runners and we have done our homework in some of the key issues that will be discussed in the coming weeks and months, starting with energy reform, having to do also with fiscal responsibility. We have outperformed our targets, both in deficit and debt reduction in the past years. We also are at the forefront of the digital agenda. We have already set up a national supervisory authority on artificial intelligence. We also want and are conducting together with the European Commission a sandbox to try to get the regulation in this difficult and cross-cutting area right. We are also at the forefront, and we're front runners in the implementation of the Next Generation EU funds with a recovery plan which explains the performance of the Spanish economy since 2021, no doubt about it. And in the area of energy, I already mentioned it, everybody I think is aware of the Iberian solution we introduced as soon as the energy prices started to go up, which has enabled Spain to bring energy prices down, the general inflation level 8 points down in less than a year, and has placed Spain amongst the countries with the lowest inflation in the EU right now at 2.4% now with the data from August. So that in a nutshell is putting Spain at a relatively good position to lead in the key debates and the key legislative files which are pursuing and moving on from now until the end of the year. And what are our top 4 priorities in this context? Well, first of all, we need to continue to deepen our economic and monetary union. We need to reinforce the strength of the EU and the strength of our currency, the euro, bringing, as I was saying, prosperity and stability throughout the whole EU. Well, the top file and the most sexy issue, and I'm sure, gentlemen, you're going to be posting a number of questions on this, and that we will be talking about this in Santiago de Compostela, is, of course, the review of the fiscal framework, the economic governance review. Well, here the challenge is to find the right balance between 2 objectives, which are not necessarily contradicting each other, and precisely we need to find the right way forward so that they reinforce each other. That's fiscal sustainability in the short, medium and long term, and fostering, supporting the necessary investments to drive the twin energy and green transitions in Europe. There are many European public goods. Many of you may have others in mind, but certainly green and digital are shared priorities and will require massive investments going forward. So we need to conduct a technical work. We have already started. The first ECOFIN meeting we had in July was already an important step forward. as all ministers endorsed the 4 key elements that should building blocks for the next for the new fiscal rules. We have not rested during the summer. Our economic and counselors, and many of them are surely here. I really want to thank them for their excellent work. They have been working hard during July and August, and now I hope that we can make swift progress in the autumn. How are we going to succeed? I think that building bridges, leaving behind the trenches of the past, you know, this divide that was really blocking progress is the first step forward, and I am quite encouraged by the developments that we have seen in the last years. Likewise, this file is very directly related to other top priorities, very challenging and difficult files having to do with the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework, including how to provide financial support to Ukraine, the new own resources to repay the next generation EU debt and to ensure a more sustainable European budget going forward, not to speak about the traditional financial sector files, banking union. It is very important that we fix the roof as the sun is shining, and this is not just a common lemma, but it is an important idea, and I hope that we can make progress on banking union, capital markets union to mobilize private financing, sustainable green finance, the digital euro, prevention of money laundering and terrorism financing. Well, any one of these files would probably already make the success or failure of one presidency. So imagine trying to have a substantive package bringing forward all these files. This is very directly linked to the second priority, which is artificial intelligence and the whole digital framework. This is very much discussed these days in Europe and in the world. How are we going to ensure that the digitalization is a humanistic digitalization, that it protects, prevails or encompasses our democratic European rights and values. And the coming weeks will be existential from this point of view. We're working very closely with the Parliament. I hope that we will be able to close the Artificial Intelligence Act. Here again, there are many other different files having to do with cyber resilience and others. But I think the AI Act is probably the top priority in the area of how to build the framework for the innovation and the development of these new technologies in the EU. Third priority, very directly linked to the other two, is how to strengthen the competitiveness of European companies and how to reinforce our strategic autonomy. Again, a core theme that will go through all the debates that will take place today, I'm sure. We need a more secure, sustainable, and affordable energy supply. We have discovered the vulnerabilities derived from depending on just one provider from these essential inputs. We have to invest in net zero technologies, a stable supply of critical raw materials. These are very difficult challenges, which also are at the heart of the Spanish presidency. And then finally, the fourth priority, which is maybe the most exotic, having to do with the characteristics of the presidency. It has to do with the role of the European Union as a global player. In this new world, which is in the making, Europe must continue to play a very important role, a leading role. And we need to also profit from the fact that Spain, in the discussions that we're having, is the gateway between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as between Europe and Africa. Building on the special relationship we have with Latin American countries and key players and strategic allies in the current geopolitical context, we have invited finance ministers from Latin America and Caribbean countries to come to the Informal ECOFIN in Santiago de Compostela. So indeed, it will be a very big orchestra joining and coming together with a very ambitious and interesting agenda. The upcoming ECOFIN meeting, Informal ECOFIN meeting, is going to bring together countries representing 60 countries, representing 14% of the world's population, 21% of global GDP. The European Union is the leading investor in the region, and we are obviously long-standing and strategic partners in many areas. Past July, there was the EU CELAC summit, and leaders at the summit pledged to renew and reinforce this standing partnership. They identified a number of 130 potential public-private investment projects across areas which are strategic and of common interest in the region. The aim is to mobilize public and private investment to focus on these projects, which are really game changers for the region. Now leaders have spoken, they agreed, and now finance ministers, we have to deliver, as we always do. European institutions and member states stand ready to provide over 45 billion to support this agenda. And what we aim to do in the meeting in Santiago, where we will meet the 27 finance ministers from the EU and 33 ministers from Latin American and Caribbean countries, as well as the IMF, the World Bank, the Investment Bank of Latin America, the CAF, the Inter-American Development Bank, OECD, the Bank for International Settlement, and many others. We're going to meet precisely to discuss how can we better cooperate, how can we foster our alliances and drive these green and digital agendas forward. We will focus on putting our money where our mouth is, how to identify these projects and how to coordinate our financial support and our efforts so that we can bring them to successful completion. We will put forward a governance framework to implement this global gateway agenda in Latin America so that these projects are implemented going beyond the Spanish presidency, and so that in the coming weeks, months, and in the coming years, this strategic alliance and this strategic agenda continues to be deployed and implemented. And furthermore, with nearly a third of the capital of the International Monetary Fund in the room, we will, of course, discuss the ongoing reform of the international financial system, how to reinforce our global safety net. Beyond the meeting with Latin American partners, just to close with some reference to other issues that will be discussed in the upcoming informal ECOFIN, which are of the interest of the European Union, profiting from the fact that not only ministers but also central bankers will be in the room, we will discuss the interaction between fiscal and monetary policy in this context of heightened uncertainty, structural changes inside and outside the Union. It is extremely interesting, I think, and timely that we sit down, ministers, experts that will be contributing to the debate, and central bank governors to discuss, how to get it right, the balance and the synergies between the different economic policy instruments. And we will also discuss the strategic autonomy, economic security, and EU public goods, a key feature, an underlying core subject for the different files that I have referred to. Let me close back where I started, because I think that since the Schuman Declaration, the European project has been a beacon for the rest of the world of global peace, of prosperity, how to succeed on the basis of economic, social, political cooperation, a social market economy, inclusive, sustainable growth, which are features that have been injected into the EU principles in recent years. What we have lived in the last years, and you were saying, Jeromin, we're no longer in a crisis mode. I cannot remember a day that I haven't been in a crisis mode because there is always one or another challenge going on somewhere in Europe. But I think that we have woken up in recent years to the fact, to the reality that we cannot depend on just one supplier. We have to reinforce our strategic autonomy. We have to reinforce our cooperation. We have to reinforce our union, also our current currency, if we want to continue to play a strong role in the world which is in the making. We need a strategic approach to globalization, which is based on open strategic autonomy. The EU is a global trade powerhouse. This is one of our strengths, and we need to build on that basis. And Spain, in this context, faces the presidency and is conducting the presidency with stamina, with strength, with determination, and with the most with a lot of positive energy and conviction that we have a good opportunity that before the end of the year, and so before the upcoming European elections, we succeed in closing some of the key files that will not only deal with the challenges of the past, but also shape our common future. Let me close with this positive idea and happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Nadia. So, First Vice President. I think what we will do now is we will deepen a little bit the topics that you went over, and just to say that there is an extraordinary alignment between the 4 big topics and then the way you subdivided them and the way we have structured the program of the BAM. And I cannot say it's coincidental, but it was not coordinated, right? It was not coordinated. It came because we did this several months ago, as you did, prepared the priorities of your presidency. So we will do this for about 20 minutes, and then we will leave some time for questions both from the floor and from the online attendees. And to make that as efficient as possible, I would ask you to put all your questions through Slido. So slido.com, you can use it on your phone, and the code is #BAM23, B-A-M 23. That way I will get a nice selection if I can make this little iPad work and be able to extract the most pertinent questions for the time that we have left. So I would basically like to deepen a little bit on the economic governance front, on the external front. And so the theme, you put it as building bridges, we put it as creating a symphony out of discord. It's the same theme. Spain has been very good, I think, at building these bridges, and the fact that we even are with the economic governance review, which is mostly but not only the review of the fiscal framework, where we are, which is not in an entirely bad place, is to no small degree due to an initial impulse that you gave with your Dutch colleagues about a year and a half ago, that essentially outlined something like a consensus vision that basically you summarize in one sentence, right? We have to reconcile debt sustainability with a system that encourages investment and preserves some flexibility for the conduct of fiscal policy. And I think the proposal of the European Commission is broadly along those lines. So this is a 2-part question. The first one is, haven't gotten this far intellectually, and I do think that we got further intellectually than and in the text of this proposal than I ever thought was possible only 2 years ago. Recently, the fronts seem to have hardened a bit, and so I would like to just you cannot tell us much about an ongoing negotiation, but how confident are you that by the end of your presidency, and remember this is the last chance of getting this done before the election, we will actually have a political agreement? That's part one. And then you mentioned banking union. So on banking union, I think there is a more fundamental problem, which is that we have not yet taken the first step of finding the basic intellectual compromise that I think we do have on fiscal governance, right? On fiscal governance, the intellectual compromise is it will be a debt sustainability analysis-based framework that tailors fiscal adjustment to each country, but with some safeguards, right? And then there is an issue of how one defines those safeguards. But the intellectual compromise is there. With banking union, I don't think it is there. We have pushed this so hard, so many times. Can you do a miracle, maybe with your Dutch friends, and achieve an intellectual compromise there?
Well, 2 very, very substantive and important questions. On the fiscal rules and the economic governance review, I am quite confident that we can find an agreement. Indeed, as you said, I think that the fact that we presented together with the Netherlands a non-paper, which came as a surprise to many, I think was an important breakthrough because it really broke the traditional dividing lines, and it has left, or it has shown that member states have moved on from the place where we were in past years. There is a lot of consensus on what the top priorities are and what our shared objectives are. And I think the pandemic has also put countries in a very different situation, because debt to GDP ratios and deficit to GDP ratios increased in all member states. In the same manner as the twin green and digital transitions, as well as the war in Ukraine, has woken up many to the fact that we need to do massive investments going forward. In July, we presented ministers with a non-paper, an issues note, and which was very welcomed. There was unanimous agreement that the 4 building blocks on which we needed to work to find a balance, to find the consensus, and to negotiate going forward would be first institutional balance, what each of the institutions will do in this new governance framework. Secondly, safeguards. How are we going to ensure that debt to GDP ratios indeed do go down, and also with the short, but also with the medium-term perspective? Thirdly, how to have margins that ensure the necessary public investment and support to private investment in these key areas, European public goods. And finally, implementation. How are we going to ensure that the rules are actually implemented and followed by all member states? And there was unanimous agreement and that these were the 4 building blocks. So what we have been doing over the summer is to work at the technical level on all these elements, with a view to having an informal exchange in the informal ECOFIN in Santiago, and then start the negotiation in earnest in the October ECOFIN. We have no time to lose, and let me close with this. I think that there is also an unanimous acknowledgement that we need to have the new rules in place by the end of the year. There is a momentum. Time is of the essence, and if we don't manage now, it will be very difficult for the Belgian presidency in the run-up to the European elections to make much more progress on substance, and then we are this would open a vulnerability next year. So I think that we have a shared interest, and that's why I'm confident that we will be able to build bridges and to find the compromise between the different positions. And on banking union, it's a very different animal. When I was in the European Commission, and there are many colleagues here that joined and that shared this phase of my life when I was responsible for financial regulation in the European Commission, and we made a lot of progress in the banking union. And we created the single supervisory mechanism and the single resolution mechanism and the single resolution fund, and then I left and went to be responsible for the budget. And years later, I came back to the table as a minister, and I realized that we had not moved a lot since, which is why I was referring in my introductory remarks to we need to fix the roof while the sun is shining, which is something we kept saying in 2010 onwards. And now, it seems that we don't have this sense of urgency the way we did. And I really think the time is now. We had in March a wake-up call coming from the US and Switzerland. We should not be complacent. We have to really have the right framework in place. And there are some obvious areas where, frankly, I would hope that we can find an agreement going forward. Now, your idea of Dutch and Spanish paper. Right now, as a presidency, I probably cannot put forward a Spanish non-paper, but actually the Netherlands and Spain see these very much alike. We are very much aligned on this. So I will give it a thought to see how we can drive the process forward.
Thank you so much. Let's maybe switch to external topics. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on economic security and how it relates to competitiveness? So first, what does economic security mean for you? So is this mostly about China, or is it something broader? And then there's, of course, the question of the fact that maybe beyond a narrow security angle, the international playing field for EU companies has become more difficult, and I would characterize it as being a result of economic nationalism, not just in China, but even in some of our allies. So how should the EU react to this? And so, this is a little bit this very fundamental debate that I was just alluding to in my opening remarks. So we do have some genuine divisions on this, even in Brussels, even in the Commission. So with some arguing that we should embrace some form of economic nationalism, if only defensively, and others arguing that, precisely because our competitiveness relies on an open trade-based system, because we are an expensive continent, right? We need to import in order to be competitive. And of course, our single market is not quite what it is in the US, so we do also need to export. And so maybe threatening that is shooting ourselves in the foot. So where do you come down here? How do you relate these two things, economic security and the competitiveness issue? Are they different topics? And then on competitiveness, how do we square this circle that we have to maintain competitiveness in an environment where we are defensive, partly because of the nationalism that we see everywhere?
Well, three reflections from my side. First, I think that since the pandemic, or one of the results of the pandemic is the fact that we have become acutely aware of our vulnerabilities, and the fact that we cannot be confident and rely on globalization as a solution for any possible problem. We woke up to our vulnerabilities when it had to do with mask supply, vaccines, then chips, then obviously energy, and now new technologies for renewables, for electric cars, or the whole artificial intelligence race which is going on in the world. And so I think that, and I truly believe that all leaders and all citizens in Europe have changed their approach to the world. And this also explains some of the political movements that are taking place, not only in Europe, but also in Europe. And so from now on, and this is maybe in a nutshell, in just one phrase, the summary of the discussion paper that we will be circulating for the informal ECOFIN, I think that this idea of economic security must be inserted in each and every one of our projects, in each and every one of our discussions and our files, which is maybe something that was not so prominent some years ago. And so this is my first thought. Second thought is, do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So indeed, Europe is a trade powerhouse. Openness has been one of our strengths. We should not resort to closing up the EU. And in that sense, I think it's very good that the European Commission has continued to negotiate trade agreements, amongst others with Latin American partners, which I think it's very important that we continue to build on this strength of ours as a key element for our role in the new geopolitical order. Likewise, I think we have to preserve our internal market. This cannot be a subsidy race which ends up impoverishing everybody, or a race to the bottom when it comes to taxes, as we have been, I think, moving away from in recent years. So we really have to protect what makes the EU unique and strong. And thirdly, it is precisely what makes us unique and strong is not only on the economic front, it is also on the side of rights and values. So the protection of human rights, the protection of democratic values, all these principles, which are enshrined also in our current support for Ukraine, but which also should be embedded in the way the European Union acts in all ongoing debates, including the global safety net. I think it's very important that we continue to be a beacon, not only of prosperity, but also of peace and protection of human rights, minorities, and building a better world, if I may, summarize it this way, because this is also one of the key features of Europe that I continue to consider a strength.
And presumably that would then also, let me say, set the tone for something like the Global Gateway or our development agenda, right? Because here I do have a bit of a feeling that we have been going not necessarily in the EU, or maybe not yet in the EU, but more generally from an approach where the rich countries at least pretended for a while to support the South out of altruism. Then, it became enlightened self-interest, and now we sometimes can drop the enlightened, and it seems just self-interest. It seems just transactional, right? And so I'm a little worried that if we think of the global gateway as a response to China and the BRI, which to some extent we do, that we might get dragged too far into the transactional approach. And I am worried that, as the old continent that was ruling that part of the world for a while, we cannot really afford to be quite so transactional. Any thoughts on that? I mean, where in the continuum of,
I don't see
foreign
this.
policy
I take a different perspective in
Okay.
the sense that I think that we have a common interest right now. So if it's on the basis of generosity, but also selfishness, that we have a strong interest in fighting climate change. Just to talk about an obvious global challenge where we need to get together and work together with other parts of the world, Asia, the US, but also Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa. So these countries need to be our allies. Europe has been leading the debate on the green transition. We have to continue to lead it. And we also should have self-confidence. I want to tell you this because sometimes we have the feeling that other parts of the world are leading in some of the technologies, but we are also very strong and very clear leaders, when it comes to how to have strong growth and reduce CO2 emissions. Europe is an example, and we have to continue to lead, I think, in this regard. So to me, it is win-win for us, but also for our partners around the world, that we work together and find the common solutions to fight climate change and to have a more sustainable and more inclusive growth. And this is very much what the Global Gateway is about. We want to invest and help these countries to be more efficient in our investment efforts and cooperation, so that we really find the game changers and can make a real change in the way growth and prosperity takes place in these parts in the rest of the world.
Right. So this brings me. I have two more questions, then we'll go to Slido. To the subject of multilateralism and multilateral cooperation. So most people in this room know you either as a former Director General of the European Commission, or of course as in your current role, but you're also the chair of the IMFC, the International Monetary and Financial Committee, and I very well remember the first session that you chaired, which was, I think, in the spring meetings of 2022. It was super hard. It was just after the invasion, and there were there were, I remember the Russian Minister of the Economy essentially abusing that session and how you dealt with it, which was remarkable. But it became clear that multilateralism is very difficult to conduct if we are essentially losing a common set of values. And where do you see this going? And maybe more generally, because I also think that your chairmanship is coming to the end, maybe not immediately, but relatively soon. What is your general takeaway from that? How do you think about the multilateral system now in different ways, and what is a thought on that you would like to share with us?
Yes, indeed. I've been chairing the IMFC for the past 2 years, and it will finish now in the annual meetings in Marrakesh, and it has been an extraordinary period to be at the helm of these international discussions, because obviously the war of Russia against Ukraine has been marking all the debates, as well as the whole geopolitical tension, which is building up and is not going down between the different parts of the world and the world superpowers. And this has made much more difficult to find consensus. It would be very important to try to preserve the existence of a communiqué, and so general language which is unanimously accepted by all member states, but all the member states of the International Monetary Fund, because that would enable us to see how these institutions can continue to contribute to global prosperity and peace at the end of the day, and preserve their value as fora for discussion and exchange of views and cooperation and coordination of economic policies. And that's my second reflection. I mean, if the Bretton Woods institutions and the G20 did not exist, we would have to make them now, because they are indispensable instruments for international cooperation and finding solutions. I think their worth has been obvious during the pandemic. Without the global safety net, we would not have been able to finance the necessary response at national level to protect jobs, to protect lives, to find a way to cooperate and develop the vaccines and bring them around the world, and to preserve financial stability in the key jurisdictions. So I do think that the IMF and the World Bank and the development banks system, as well as other informal fora such as the G20, play a key role in bringing together the different leaders and enabling debates and a coordination which is really indispensable going forward. So that would be my second thought. You know, let's preserve this global order and find a way to adapt it to this new world which is in the making, so that I wouldn't say it is the conductor of the orchestra, but it allows all the different instruments, all the different parts of the world, the languages, to interact in an harmonious manner. Because the alternative, I think we are all aware of what it would be.
Yes. Thank you. So my last question, which is actually a bridge to the slide of questions, because it says, I see that question among several, is you are a candidate for the presidency of the European Investment Bank. Can you tell us a little bit about why do you want the job and what do you think what is the potential for that institution? Where would you take it?
Well, thank you very much. What a surprising question. I thought it would come up. I thought it would come up. So, well, I mean, the European Investment Bank is the financial arm of the EU. It is our bank. It is a key financial institution. It's the largest development bank, public development bank in the world. It has played a key role until now, and I think it has a key role to play going forward. When I speak in my remarks about massive investments, public and private investment needs to be mobilized, be it support for Ukraine, be it also the role of the EU in the world, be it, of course, investment in the development of new technologies, the green and digital transition. We're all aware of the need to mobilize financial resources, and the European Investment Bank is a very strong institution, which I think should be even reinforced further, you know, going forward. And I think it is a very challenging moment, but also a very inspiring task. And President Sanchez thought, you know, that given the importance of the institution, we should really have a strong candidature, and that's why we put it forward. I mean, the caliber of the candidates that are running explains the interest of the institution, I think, and explains also my strong motivation. But anyway, right now I'm also very much focused in being the vice president of the Spanish government, because up until at least, you know, December, this is my day-to-day job, and one which is very absorbing, I can assure you.
Great. Okay, I'm going to pick a few questions, very, very many good questions from Slido, so I'll have to be selective. We have a very short one, a punchy one. In your opinion, how likely is Ukraine's EU membership during the next 10 years?
I don't have a magic ball. I don't have a magic ball.
Yes.
Well, what we have seen in last years, I mean, nobody thought, you know, some years ago, we started in a very different place. Nobody thought that we would have new memberships in NATO, that we would have some European countries that have traditionally made a point of not being in NATO, you know, come into the alliance. nobody would have thought that there would be this very fast movement, to bring Ukraine closer to the EU. Funnily enough, this is a result of Russia's aggression. So, so far, I would say that the result is the opposite of probably what that aggression was aiming at. Difficult to say, but certainly the EU, let me put it differently. Some years ago, we were seeing a trend, the discussion was about Brexit. Will other countries leave the EU? I think that what we're living today shows that the EU is a strong partnership and a very important player, and that we will probably enlarge going forward, which is quite the opposite debate to the one we may have had some years ago.
Right. Another short and snappy question. Do you believe inflation is beaten, last mile, or long marathon ahead?
Well, it depends where you look at. So, and I'm not ironic or about it, but it is true that you have some countries, Belgium and Spain, have an inflation rate around 2.4%. Underlying inflation is around 6%, but it's going down. So if you look at that, then you'd say it's been beaten. But other member states within the Eurozone have much higher inflation rates. So I can understand the challenge for central banks and the European Central Bank right now to try to navigate in this complex scenario. And as President Lagarde was saying recently, with models which maybe are no longer fit to reflect the complexities of today's economic environment, I think we have brought inflation down, and I think we have to focus on our midterm targets and try to ensure that we beat inflation without weakening the European economy. This is no time to weaken the European economy. Let me leave it there.
And maybe to end, we have actually several questions on the European Green Deal. So I'll read out two. How is Spain approaching the implementation of the Green Deal, considering the amount of legislation and the effects on our economy? So apparently by someone from Spain. And then we have a similar question. How do you approach the resistance to move forward on EU Green Deal policy developments? And I think, the background to this question is the fact that essentially the going has gotten tougher, I think, for Green Deal implementation, because it's becoming there's an immediate need for action now, and there are political costs. And there is, in fact, a paper that will be issued by Bruegel today involving Jean-Pierre Ferry, who is here, Simone Tagliapietra, and Georg Zachmann on just this very topic. So we would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, two thoughts from my side. First, you will not be surprised because it has gone through my whole speech. I think that it is really a no-brainer that we need to drive this green transition. We've been leading. It is a technological opportunity. It is an intergenerational fairness priority. And so we have to deliver on this green transition. And actually, and we have also some reports which I'm sure you have these reports that show, and Jean-Pierre Ferry published a very interesting paper on this, which shows that an orderly transition is much more efficient and less costly than a disorderly change, a shock. So the more that we continue to make progress on a plan which is known, which is clear, which brings together public and private investment, and which manages the transition. I think the idea of transition is important. We are in a better place than having to respond to the growing number of climatic shocks and challenges and the impact of climate change, which is quite obvious by all scientific analysis, in a disorderly and unplanned, disorganized, uncoordinated manner. So all economic analysis lead in that direction, so we better continue and pursue this path. My second remark has to do with the example of Spain, because Luckily, when we took office in 2018, one of the first decisions we took was removing what was known as the tax on the sun. We have a very sunny day today in Brussels, but this is not the common feature or the main characteristic of the weather around this part of Europe. But in Spain, you do have a lot of sun. It was totally nonsensical that we had a tax on sun. So there were disincentives to self-consumption and the deployment of solar panels. So this was one of the first decisions we took in 2018. And since then, we published the Energy and Climate Plan, which we have renewed and updated recently, which has been guiding us with a very clear roadmap about energy transition, but about energy efficiency and all the deployment and the development of the new technologies and green hydrogen, self-consumption. And I think that this has proven to be the right way forward. It made us stronger when energy prices went up. Diversification and the strong penetration of renewables have enabled Spain to have, and Portugal to have much lower energy prices. And this is improving the competitiveness of Spanish companies, which are gaining market share, even in the current challenging circumstances. So it shows that once you go above a line, I think the whole debate changes. And I don't think there is a lot of debate in Spain right now about the green transition that most, the vast majority of the population see as necessary, fair for future generations, but also bringing prosperity if we manage it in the right way forward. Yeah. So to me, this should be the right approach at European level. Trying to follow a coherent path, which of course has to take account of the challenges and the different rhythms and priorities of the different countries.
Vice President Calviño, thank you so much. Thanks. Muchas gracias. I think we have about 12 minutes until the next session.